Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam.
I'm Emma.
Democrat Tim Walz and Republican Vance have met for what was expected to be their only vice presidential debate ahead of the November election.
The VP hopefuls met in New York for a broadcast lasting over 90 minutes where the candidates debated issues from the climate to the economy, immigration, abortion and gun rights, as well as their plan to lead America as second in command to the future president, either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. We'll take you through what went down at the debate in today's deep dive. So there's just over a month left until the US election, if you can believe it. But Sam, you were there, boots on the ground, very recently, weren't you?
Well, I'd like to pretend that I was there doing the brave work for the Daily Aus of figuring out this US election. But no, I was there at the tail end of my honeymoon. That's why you haven't heard me on the podcast for about the last month. But I can give you a sense of what it's like in the US.
Yeah, please do.
The election only 5 weeks away. I mean, granted, I was in New York, which is traditionally a very Democrat-aligned area, but it's really everything that everyone's focused on. It is the key moment. I mean, there is so much going on in the news cycle at the moment, but the names Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, Vance, and Tim Walz is kind of what everyone's talking about.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it's certainly dominated headlines here in Australia for what feels like an eternity. Now we are really nearing the pointy end, but we've been speaking a lot on the podcast in recent months about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, less so about these vice presidential candidates. So before we really get stuck in, where are we at more broadly, you know, not only in terms of the political pulse of the American people, but what about the polls?
Well, we always take these polls with a large pinch of salt because they haven't been exactly right in the past. Nonetheless, it is important to look at the polling and see what it says. And basically, it says nothing. We are no closer to an answer than we were the last time you guys spoke about this on the podcast. Opinion polling shows the race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris remains neck and neck. Online polling aggregator 538, they average out the polling data collected by multiple polling companies. And their national poll shows Harris with an average lead of 2.9%. Now, that's really not statistically enough to say she's got a confident lead.
Yeah.
So I think you should think about this as really anyone's game.
So given that it's anyone's game, you know, every moment now over the next 4 and a bit weeks really does matter, which brings us to the vice presidential debate.
And it's an interesting one because normally we don't talk about the vice presidents. We don't really focus on it. I mean, TV audiences for a vice presidential debate aren't normally big, but this one was different yesterday. Emma, run me through a bit about both of these candidates.
Yes, so we've got Vance for the Republicans, Trump's pick, and Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's pick for the Democrats. They were in New York for this debate yesterday, hosted by CBS News, and really it was a chance for them to tell us a little bit more about who they are as candidates and, you know, an opportunity for debate on policy, of course. In terms of who they are, 39-year-old Ohio Senator J.D. Vance was announced as Trump's running mate at the Republican National Convention back in July. He's previously been a vocal Trump critic but has become a really strong supporter of the former president over the past few years. He grew up in Middletown, Ohio. That's a predominantly industrial area. And he's spoken really openly about a difficult childhood, growing up with a mother who has struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. And this is something he's discussed in not only on the campaign trail, but in his 2016 best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy. We've heard a lot about that book in recent months. Vance also served in the US Marine Corps for 4 years. He later studied law at Yale, and that's where he met his future wife, Usha Chilukuri. She is a lawyer and daughter of Indian migrants. They have 3 children together. And Vance made his first tilt to politics in 2022 when he ran for the Senate representing the state of Ohio, and he was obviously successful in that run.
It's crazy that that was only 2 years ago, and here he is as the vice presidential pick for the Republican Party. You said before that he wasn't always this loyal Trump supporter. What did he say about the former president?
Yeah, so his book release back in 2016 coincided with Trump's campaign against Hillary Clinton. And during interviews about the book, Vance said he was, quote, never a Trump guy, that he, quote, never liked him. In a now deleted tweet, Vance said, Trump makes people I care about afraid, immigrants, Muslims, etc. Because of this, I find him reprehensible. Now, JD Vance has really played that sentiment down significantly during the campaign trail, but it's a point of contention that Democrats have really leaned into over the campaign. So they continue to bring it up, and those comments continue to, I'm sure JD Vance feels, haunt him.
And it was interesting when those comments were put to JD Vance in the debate yesterday. JD Vance delivered the same response he's kind of delivered throughout this campaign, which was he was wrong about Trump and that he had consumed the same false media narratives, those are the words that he uses, about the former president. He was misled by the media, and now that he has kind of seen the light about who the former president really was, he knows that he's a good guy now. So he's done a real 180 there. So that's JD Vance. What do we need to know about the Democrats' pick, Tim Walz?
Yeah, so Tim Walz was announced as Kamala Harris's pick for VP in August. That, of course, followed this reshuffle of candidates after Joe Biden dropped out of the race. And Tim Walz is a 60-year-old. He is the governor of Minnesota. He was elected to governor there in 2019. You might have heard him referred to as Coach Tim. Now, that's because he taught high school geography in his home state of Nebraska. He also led the football team at that school to its first American football state championship. So the Democrats have kind of leaned into that sentiment of Coach Tim.
He's the daggy dad.
He's the daggy dad. He's just like you. He was your teacher. He was your coach. You know him. He previously represented a rural district in the U.S. House of Reps from 2007 to 2019. So he has had this long career or longer career in politics than JD Vance. One thing about Walz is that he gained a lot of attention after he called Trump and JD Vance weird.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas.
Now, this has really caught on across the Democrats. It's created a shift in how the Dems have spoken about Republicans. These clips of Walz using weird to describe Trump have really gone viral. And another thing to note about him is that he was governor of Minnesota at the time of the murder of George Floyd by police in 2020. He has been criticised for his response to the protests that occurred after that murder and for not doing more to prevent the damage that followed.
And so that brings us to the vice presidential debate this week. It was on yesterday about 11 a.m. Australia time. I want to talk more about the policy side of things in a minute, but we watched it together in the office. What were your general impressions of the debate?
Yeah, I think something that really struck me right out of the gates was how nervous Tim Walz appeared to be. He was the first of the two candidates to answer a question.
Which is decided by a coin toss. So
exactly.
It's often an interesting one.
And people really use those first moments of each candidate's response as a bit of a metric of how it's going to go, who appears to be the more confident candidate. Now, it was a really serious one from the get-go on the developing situation in the Middle East. I think it's fair to say neither of them really answered the question, but Walz did seem to stumble over his words a fair bit more, took a little longer to find his footing, whereas Vance was pretty confident from the start. Walz eventually kind of warmed up over the course of the debate, but commentators have noted that JD Vance, he might have a bit of an edge when it comes to media training. He did a national tour of his book. He's done a lot of interviews, and that might have showed on the debate floor.
Okay, so that's kind of the manner side of the debate. Why don't we go now to the matter and the real meat of what they talked about? We saw a huge focus on immigration during the recent presidential debate between Harris and Trump. Did the vice presidential debate follow that same pattern?
Yeah, it was certainly a focus of the debate, but the temperature was turned down a little this time compared to that Trump-Harris debate. So you might remember Trump making those viral comments alleging Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating people's domestic pets. Now, these comments have been broadly condemned as entirely untrue, but they certainly added to a kind of panic about immigration. JD Vance didn't go as far as Trump in the VP debate, but he did touch on Springfield. He said it was one of many communities around the US overwhelmed by illegal immigration.
You've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border.
Now, Vance focused on this sort of need to empower law enforcement. He took aim at Kamala Harris for failing to control the US border at Mexico early on when that was within her portfolio in the Biden administration. And that is echoing the sentiments that we've heard from Trump.
And when those claims were put back to Walz, how did he handle the fact that he's representing the party that's currently in the White House? It's their immigration record that's being challenged, and it's his potential boss that is being held responsible.
Yeah, so he was defensive of Harris naturally, and rather than kind of dwell on what she may or may not have done during her time in the White House, he referred to her history as the Attorney General of California. So we know that Kamala Harris was a public prosecutor previously before politics, and as AG of California, you know, that is a large border state. Here's a bit of what Tim Walz said.
She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here.
It kind of feels to me like there are three primary buckets of policy being debated in this US election. Immigration, as we've talked about, the economy, which just keeps coming up over and over again, and abortion. I want to talk about that now. Give me a sense of how that discussion played out.
So basically, the debate here surrounds the fact that the constitutional right to an abortion was ended in the US after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. Now, this has meant that abortion has been left to the states. It's become a state issue and a key election issue as debate continues over whether or not the Supreme Court should be able to decide or whether or not the states should be able to regulate abortion access. Kamala Harris has said that if Trump's re-elected, he would sign off on a national abortion ban. Trump's denied that, but he does agree that the states should be regulating this. Back to the VP debate, JD Vance accused the Democrats of taking what he called a very radical pro-abortion stance, and he made this point about a need to introduce policies to support families.
So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships, and we have got to earn people's trust back, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
And here is how Tim Walz responded.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. We're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion. That's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices.
Another topic that always is around US politics hasn't played as much of a role in this presidential debate as I actually thought it would, but it did come up in the discussion yesterday. Gun control. We know there's been more gun violence, a spike in mass shootings. There was even an attempted assassination or two on one of the presidential candidates. Did either of the vice presidential candidates say anything different about their approach to guns, perhaps that we didn't know before?
Yeah, I'm always personally interested in the conversation around gun violence because, as you mentioned, it's really just such a part of American life that's removed from what we experience here in Australia. But Vance was asked about the responsibility of parents in what was described as America's gun violence epidemic. And this was off the back of the parents of a school shooter in the US recently being charged with involuntary manslaughter. Now, JD Vance said there's a difference between a child stealing a gun and being given access to one by a parent. He kind of deflected on the issue and he said schools needed to have better security. But he pivoted the conversation back to the immigration issue. He said that the majority of gun violence in the US was being committed by illegally obtained weapons, and that those weapons came over the border illegally because of border control issues, which were, in his words, Kamala Harris's fault.
And then the discussion was moved to Tim Walz. Did Tim Walz lean into that immigration-centric response, or did he bring it back to guns?
Well, one of the more surprising moments of this debate was what happened next, which was that Tim Walz spoke about something his son went through that I had never heard him speak about. He said his 17-year-old son actually witnessed a shooting at a community center where he was playing volleyball.
Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead. And they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work.
I was really interested to see how JD Vance would handle questions around the transfer of power, because he's part of a presidential ticket that has January 6th hanging over its head. This idea of Donald Trump not perhaps showing that he's able to hand over power should he lose. JD Vance was then asked that directly, would you be compliant with the processes that US politics has in place? How did JD Vance tackle that one?
Yeah, it has to be said that this is the moment I think he probably handled the worst throughout the night. And the commentary around it has been that this might have been his slip up in an otherwise pretty smooth debate. He has come under fire, essentially, for refusing to acknowledge that Trump lost that 2020 election. He was really pressed on this issue. Tim Walz pressed JD Vance near the end of the debate and continued to ask him to answer the question. Vance played it off, said that he was, focused on the future, which Walz called a damning non-answer. Overall, though, things were fairly formal and respectful. It's not the debate that we saw from Trump and Kamala Harris. It's not the debate that we are used to seeing from US political figures. But I wanted to finish on a grab from both of the candidates, which did take a different kind of tone about respecting each other and accepting the outcome of an election.
This issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it.
We're going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help.
And when I was watching that go down at the end of the debate, it really did bring back to me some of the research that's come out of the US that show that there is a portion of voters that are just craving normality, and they're craving convention, and they're craving civil discussion, and that clearly both camps see leaning into that as a way to actually gain more votes. I mean, we have to look at everything that happens now as an attempt to gain more votes, but it was good to see some of that civility come back into the way that the debate wrapped up. Emma, thanks so much for taking us through that.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all we've got time for on today's edition of the Daily Aus. It's so nice to be back on the pod. I look forward to having more chats with you guys in the coming weeks and months ahead. If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd love you to leave a review on Spotify or podcast. You can give us a rating. You can share it with a friend. And if you're watching on YouTube, click that little subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to independent media. We'll speak to you again tomorrow.